Hello, and welcome to the second episode of Talking Scotland. And this monthly podcast is brought to you by the Aberdeen Independence Movement and the National. We'll be focusing on politics in and around the Northeast, the Highlands, and the borders. We felt at Aberdeen Independence Movement and the National that it was important to plug a gap, ensuring a Northeast voice and focus was heard. We were basically responding to people's comments to have discussions outside of the Central Belt. So we hope this does meet your needs. We'll be focusing on issues that disproportionately impact us up here in the northeast of Scotland. And I thought for this episode, it would be really important to turn our full attention to the oil and gas sector, our oil and gas sector, covering energy and a just transition. Now, this topic is made even more topical off the back of last week's budget. Over the past week alone, we have seen how the budget will impact our crucial oil and gas sector, which supports over 100,000 jobs, hundreds of thousands of jobs in the Northeast, in fact. The budget has indeed prompted a major debate over the North Sea oil and gas sector, where we are seen to be the biggest losers. So this episode will have a look at the budget, discuss a just transition, what it means, and the possible path to achieving this. Now, this week's guest is Stephen Flynn MP, one of our Northeast MPs representing Aberdeen South. Stephen is the SNP Westminster leader, so he'll be right at the heart of all the discussions taking place in Westminster. That includes the shambles, the shenanigans of the system, and the important fight to make Scotland's voice heard. I'll stop talking now so we can welcome Stephen. Welcome to the podcast, Stephen. It's lovely to have you.
Hey, Fatima, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing today? Is there anything busy up in Westminster just now?
Well, I'm actually not long down in London. I had a big day at home yesterday with my kids to catch up after the chaos of the last few weeks. But yeah, everyone's mind is still very much focused on the fallout from the budget, and of course, much of Westminster today is enveloped in racism rows again, which is just it's abhorrent. It's unforgivable, and yeah, Westminster's that's all Westminster's talking about.
Yeah, I think it might be worth just highlighting that briefly. So this concerns Diane Abbott, and one of Tory's lead donors made a racist remark towards Diane Abbott. It's been now paraphrased as rude instead of calling it out for what it is. He said, looking at Diane Abbott makes you want to hate all Black people, or was it women? I don't have the quote in front of me. I can just remember what it was. But do you think they should the Tories should sack him as a donor? Should cut ties with him?
Yeah, of course they should. I mean, you can't in any sort of public role, and I'm sorry, but given 10 million quid, I think it is, to a major political party, very much puts you in a public role. Be making racist comments, and they are racist. There's no two ways about it. And this notion that Tory ministers who've been out on the TV today have tried to say that it's okay, he's apologised, it's fine, we should move on. It was half a decade ago. I mean, it was 5 years ago. The guy's an adult, a very wealthy adult who's been racist, and it needs to be condemned by everyone. And yeah, the Tories should be given the cash back, and they should be saying no more, no thank you. And Diane Abbott should be expecting more than just an apology, in my view. And whilst, of course, there's that abhorrent racism that she's been subjected to, it's also the notion that she should be shot. She's a sitting member of Parliament. She was a trailblazer for Black women in Parliament. And yeah, here we are with someone saying, "Oh, it's rude to say that you should shoot someone." That's beyond rude. It's just it's appalling, and I feel really sorry for Diane.
Absolutely. And although not the discussion today, it would be interesting to see what your comments and views are on this developing story. Before logging on, I did check, and Diane Abbott asked for support from the Labour leader, Keir Starmer. She's not part of the Labour opposition group as of yet, but she's still a member of the wider Labour Party. So let's see if Keir Starmer will come to her corner. So on to today's podcast and the topic that we're discussing. So we're going to kick off with this spring budget, the events of last week. Now, there seems to be massive cuts proposed, and the biggest losers have revealed to be the oil and gas sector, where there does not even appear to be an investment. Instead, to fund the national insurance 2p cuts, which was a big announcement of Jeremy Hunt's budget, which will take effect from the 6th of April. There'll be an extension of the windfall tax. Now, this has prompted a major debate over the North Sea oil and gas and its role in the transition to net zero. Now, I think let's take this development in two parts. First of all, can we afford more cuts, Stephen?
Well, firstly, in terms of what the budget did was, so we're still going to see taxation going to its highest level since 1948, but alongside that, we're seeing a handout to some of the richest people in society. We're seeing a cut in capital gains tax when it should be going the other way. It should be getting equalised with income tax because people like Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer have benefited from the fact that the capital gains tax is so low already, and it's being made lower. And we now know that it's baked in that there's going to be tens of billions of pounds worth of cuts to come in the public sector as a result of the decisions that were made. So that's our NHS, that's our schools, that's our infrastructure. Right across the board, there's going to be tens of billions of pounds of cuts. That is austerity on stilts. It's very much austerity 2.0. And both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are in this conspiracy of silence when it comes to this. They don't want to talk about the damage of the budget which the Chancellor has put in place. And that's before, of course, we get to the fact that there's little to no measures in relation to the cost of living crisis, which is the biggest thing impacting everyone. And you've rightly highlighted that in order to fund this tax cut for the richest folk in England, Scotland's oil and gas sector is going to be taxed even more. And this comes hot on the tails of the Labour Party, saying they would also do something similar. They would go a little bit further and put at risk 100,000 jobs in the northeast of Scotland. So whichever way we turn at the moment, Westminster's not working for the people of Scotland. It's certainly not working for people in the northeast of Scotland. And there's going to be long-term consequences for all of us, because money that's not spent at Westminster means that there's less money to spend in Holyrood, which means that our friends and colleagues in Edinburgh are going to have to make even more difficult decisions because of decisions made at this place by people who we've not put in government. It's just an absurd situation. The losers are the public, as is always the case when it comes to politics at Westminster. And we need to win, because this is a general election year. We need the leader of the Labour Party to be very clear with the public what it is that he believes in. Does he believe in continuation of austerity, or will he tax more, or will he borrow more? He's refusing to say. This guy's going to be the next Prime Minister, and he won't even tell the public what his views and his values are. And that's not good enough. That's really not good enough, which is why I'm sure during the course of that general election campaign, the plans of the Labour Party, or indeed the lack of plans of the Labour Party, are going to become a hot topic of conversation, not just in the northeast of Scotland, but right across Scotland as a whole.
Absolutely. And, you mentioned what sectors are going to be impacted, such as the NHS, how it's going to hurt families during the cost of living crisis, our public finances, and, wider investment in green energy. As the SNP opposition in Westminster, to be honest, let's face it, even though you're not the largest group, you do seem to be the most effective opposition, especially during the whole Gaza ceasefire issue. You do appear to be the most effective opposition when it comes to holding the Tories to account. What would you have done differently with this budget? What would you have liked to have seen happen?
So I think the starting point is you seek to invest in the future. And the UK for years now has had massive difficulties in terms of growing the economy, but massive difficulties in terms of productivity. And none of that is being solved by the decisions that the Chancellor has taken. We need to firstly invest in our young people, which means investing in the very public sector that the Tories are going to cut back, and indeed the Labour Party seem quite happy to sit back and watch them cut back. And then you also need to invest in the tech of tomorrow. You need to be looking at the green renewable future, that race to net zero. It's what the United States is doing through IRA, the tens of billions of pounds which President Biden is pumping into the American economy. We've seen the European Union respond to that, and we're seeing nations much further afield invest in that future as well, because they understand that if you want to get growth into the economy, if you want to create the jobs of tomorrow to replace the jobs of today in the years to come, then you need to invest, because you need to be able to attract those businesses who are going to drive that to your nation. Scotland is so well placed in order to capitalise upon that race to net zero. We're being massively let down by Westminster in relation to that. So the budget should have been about investing in our young people. It should have been about investing in our public services, and it should have been about investing in that net zero future. That's hugely important in terms of combating climate change, but it's hugely important, perhaps even more or just as important, in terms of providing the jobs and productivity and economic growth that the economy needs. And Westminster just isn't talking about these things. They don't want to talk about them, and that damages Scotland massively.
Absolutely. And, I think it just boils down to the values that are entrenched in the governments that we elect. I mean, the Tories are always obviously going to support the highest income earners. I think that's true for your decisions. They are a party of austerity, and austerity hits the poorest, the working class, the worst. So which really brings up Labour as a surprise, the decisions that Labour is making. It seems to be a surprise where they're almost copying the Tories to some extent. I think, I don't know if you've seen the Sophie Ridge interview with Keir Starmer. So she interviewed Keir Starmer on his economic priorities. She asked, will you tax more, borrow more, or become the austerity PM? Keir Starmer repeatedly dodged that question, so that question has remained unanswered. What do you make of Keir Starmer's no response to that? Yeah,
I think the lack of answers is very telling, and anyone who watches that will look at it and say, well, what does he stand for? What is the point of the Labour Party? What is it that they're going to do? How are they going to make sure that there's investment in public services in the immediate term, not in 15 or 20 years' time, but now, because that money is needed now. It's needed now to support our schools, it's needed now to support our NHS, and it's needed now to invest in those jobs and those opportunities for tomorrow. And, I think it does a great disservice to the public for the man who's looking to become Prime Minister to simply sit silent and to sit on the fence. And, the consequences will be felt by the public themselves.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth stating to all our viewers what the IFS has said, if no one has heard. The IFS has warned that the UK budget implies a real terms cut to net public sector investment of more than 25%, which is 18 billion, between 2024 and 2025 and 2028 to 29, and up to 25 billion on a spending per person basis. It has also accused the Tories and Labour Party of a conspiracy of silence over the cuts, warning government and opposition are joining in a conspiracy of silence in not acknowledging the scale of the choices and trade-offs that will face us after the election. They and we could be in for a rude awakening when these choices become unavoidable. It seems from the IFS that the Tories and the Labour Party are practically indistinguishable. You don't really have a clear alternative when it comes to the general election. So that's a really massive blow to democracy, to be honest, with no options there. And turning now to what it means for us up here in the Northeast. So you also
there is an option in Scotland, though, of course, Fatima, which is to vote for the Scottish National Party.
You know where I stand on that, of course. So I think let's turn our attention to what it means for us up in the Northeast. What response do you have to the extension of the windfall tax, specifically to fund the Northeast, specifically to fund the National Insurance 2p cuts?
Yeah, so this has been something which is really frustrating for me, because those of us who are in Aberdeen, we live it and we understand it, because our communities, primarily the wealth that exists within them, has derived from the jobs and opportunities which have been available in the North Sea. Now, do we need to transition? Yeah, absolutely, we need to transition. Does that need to be done at pace? Absolutely, not just economically, but also in order to deal with the challenges of climate change. But it has to be a just transition. And if you create a cliff edge, which the Labour Party's proposals do, so what they would seek to do is increase the windfall tax and indeed to extend it. And the experts and politicians are often told, why don't you listen to the experts? Well, we're listening to them. The experts have been very clear that those actions, along with changes to investment allowances, would see up to 100,000 jobs go. Now, that is a cliff edge. That's not a just transition. That doesn't protect the jobs that you have now or the communities that I represent. but it also means you don't get to net zero, because the only people that will actually facilitate the just transition are the very people who are working in the energy sector at the moment. An engineer who works offshore is an engineer, first and foremost. They can work on a renewables project onshore, or indeed a renewables project offshore, but you need to be able to give them gainful employment to do so. And a lot of people who work in the oil and gas sector are transient. They will move to where the opportunities are. We have a homegrown indigenous workforce that we have to protect. It's not just about protecting the economic benefits that we gain from having the North Sea as it is. It's also about creating that sustainable future. And we should be very strong in putting forward those arguments. We've sought to be very strong in putting forward those arguments in response to Labour's proposals. Nobody can sit silent and say if 100,000 jobs potentially on the line is good enough. And we have to be that voice for the North East, but that voice for Scotland as a whole. And the reality of what the Conservatives have done is they've sought to take a little bit of the ground from Labour, but in doing so, they're seeking to bankroll broken Brexit Britain on the back of Scotland's oil wealth, which at the same time will impact investor confidence in the North East. It will impact investor confidence in the oil and gas sector, which again has a knock-on consequence on the very people who work in the sector and indeed that wider supply chain. I've spoken to some of these people already on the back of it. It's why Andrew Bowie and Douglas Ross they were so angry about it, because they understand the political implications for them of a constantly changing environment. Because if you get to the end point here, it means people's jobs, people's opportunities, and indeed that ability to then transition to net zero in order to combat climate change. All of these things are to the impact cumulatively, and we need to be aware of that, and we need to respond to it on that basis. Scotland's being used or Scotland's North Sea sector is being used as the cash cow for Westminster. It has been done for decades, but it's going to have consequences if it continues, and we rightly need to speak up against that.
Absolutely. And I mean, over the past few decades, we've seen the UK benefit billions, over 350 billion of North Sea revenues. But we know, slightly more than that, over billions. I'll just go with billions of North Sea revenues. It's crazy, the money. And the stark reality is that we know it has not been spent for the benefit of Scotland. We have seen in latest discussions how it's even going to nuclear as well. I think that's even from Andrew Bowie as well, who is a candidate for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine up here, for anyone up in the Northeast listening in. So we're seeing what's happening with our revenues. And it's, I think it's you yourself that you mentioned we are energy rich, but fuel poor as well. It's an embarrassment that we're in this situation, to be honest. I mean,
yeah. So like when we're talking about the energy sector, like it's not just, so a lot of the companies who work in oil and gas are also the companies who will invest in carbon capture and storage. Are the ones who will invest in hydro pump storage. Are the ones who will invest in offshore wind and in onshore wind, who are currently looking to actually build offshore wind farms in order to decarbonise oil and gas rigs. But there's going to be a plethora of supply chain opportunities, which creates jobs and opportunities for everyone on the back of it, which allows us to move on and hit our net zero targets whilst at the same time providing a just and fair transition. And that's why we need to be very clear in terms of outlining to the people of Scotland that what the Labour Party are proposing with regards to ending investment allowances and increasing the windfall tax and extending it doesn't just lead to 100,000 jobs. It's also for the benefit, as you've said, of funding nuclear projects in England. And the Conservative Party, another conspiracy here, this one not of silence but of taxation. They want to tax Scotland's industry to fund tax cuts in England for the wealthiest, which will in turn hit Scotland's jobs and opportunities for the future. And this is huge, because this is Scotland's future. The energy sector is hugely important. It's hugely important not just in terms of jobs and opportunities, but also attracting investment. Because if we can create an economy which is based around green renewable energy, if you're a big company who's looking to invest, if you're a big data center or you're a big industrial player, you're going to want to base yourself somewhere which has clean, green, renewable energy at affordable prices. That's the prize. That's the prize for Scotland needs to come, and we can have that competitive advantage. We can be a world leader in that field. But in order for that to happen, we need investment. We didn't see investment in the budget, but we also need to protect the jobs that we have at the moment because, as I said earlier, we don't get to that space. We can't achieve that without the people who work in industry at the moment.
Exactly. No, it seems that there's a lot of focus, as the name suggests, on justice, equity, and ensuring that no one's left behind. And I think particularly those who work in fossil fuels, I think they would have a lot of fear around a just transition and how that looks up here in the Northeast as well. Because even if I think of something that my colleague, Councillor Glenn Reynolds, who is the candidate for West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine up here, the SNP candidate.
Good plug. Come on, Glenn.
He said, he wrote a very good piece on a just transition. And he said, when you talk about the energy sector up here, you're talking about jobs. You know, jobs are held by our families, friends, and neighbours. It's about the money that pays the rent or the mortgage, and about spending power in local shops and businesses. So a just transition needs to ensure that we do not leave these people behind, because otherwise we're going to see a lot of resistance when it comes to a just transition as well. And I think he also made a very great comment when he said that whether you see a just transition as an economic and environmental necessity, a golden opportunity, or a sad reality, just transition has to happen. Otherwise, Aberdeen and other parts of the Northeast and Northern Isles could become like the mining communities of the 1980s. So there's a lot of risk of us not just transitioning in good time here. So I think we've only got about 9 minutes left. I understand you have to go, Stephen. So I think the final issue I'd like to tackle is, how do we get there? Because we need to recognize that a lot of the powers lie with Westminster. You know, powers over the energy market, for example, are reserved at Westminster. Powers over licensing are reserved at Westminster. How are we supposed to achieve just transition when it appears that Scotland's idea of a just transition sometimes is almost at odds with Westminster? Where do we go?
Yeah, well, indeed, and Westminster's control of the energy sector is vast. Obviously, given the fact that the energy is a reserved matter, something which is often forgotten by many of our political opponents. But notwithstanding that, Scotland has obviously led the way in relation to the likes of onshore wind, and through the likes of licensing for Scotland, we've got so much more to come. But what we need to do is make sure that at the heart of the place that matters most when it comes to energy spending, we have strong Scottish voices being very clear about what it is that we want to happen, and we will be unashamed for as long as we need to be in this place, which hopefully is not too long, because we all want that independent Scotland where we don't have to worry about the decisions being taken at Westminster. But whilst we still send Scottish MPs to London, we need to make sure that we've got the strongest advocates we possibly have for our own interests. And that's not just about defending the jobs that we have just now. It's about speaking loudly and proudly about those opportunities for the future. The fact that we do have that huge offshore wind potential, and it was just last year that there was no bids into the auction round that effectively funds offshore wind, because the UK government hadn't set the price for the auction at a requisite level. It knocked everyone back a year, and that has an impact upon supply chains and jobs and opportunities, and inward investment and everything that impacts the economy. So we've got our offshore wind, we've got our onshore wind, we have the green hydrogen potential on the back of that. And I never ceases to amaze me that when you speak to our counterparts in Europe, they're so excited by Scotland's energy potential, in particular the green hydrogen energy potential, because they are looking for sources to deliver for their big industrial complexes, and indeed for their homes and their transport as well. They're looking for solutions, and Scotland can offer them those solutions, and they're excited about that. And we should be excited about that too. And if we look at the likes of Corrie Glass or Cruachan, who are looking for the huge investment from it's not even a huge investment, they're just looking for a financial mechanism from the UK government to facilitate the expansion of hydro pump storage. There's talk in the press today about from the UK Energy Secretary about new gas-fired plants, but there's no talk about Cruachan or Corrie Glass, which effectively act as a battery in order to provide that additional electricity to the grid if it's needed, and which can take electricity as well, incidentally, from some of our pre-existing and future renewables projects when they're working at capacity and the grid can't take that energy. So the opportunities are huge. We have some of the best engineers and minds on the planet through our pre-existing industries, and we need to set these folk the mission of making sure that we deliver on our green energy ambitions. And that's good for everyone. It's good for the economy. It's good for jobs, and it's good for the planet. And it's a huge prize. And that's why we need SNP MPs in Westminster championing that cause, making sure that London is in no doubt as to where we stand. And then it's our job to also convince the people of Scotland that we can do it, and this can be the energy blueprint for Scotland's future. I think that's a pretty compelling case, and I know from speaking with the likes of Gillian Martin, another fellow northeaster, that she's excited by those opportunities too, and hopefully the Scottish population will be.
Excellent. I like that you mentioned that that Europe is actually looking to us as an example as well in terms of hydrogen as well. It's worth noting to viewers, if you don't know, that Aberdeen actually has the largest hydrogen fleet of buses. Aberdeen alone. So here we are in Aberdeen. That's good. And, it's interesting that you also mentioned, because this has been a massive discussion about our SNP MPs being down in Westminster. I think you've alluded to the fact that it's important they're there to fight for us. So I take it you do not agree with withdrawing our SNP MPs from Westminster. Would you feel that's counterproductive?
Like I'm sent here with a very clear job to speak up for the people that I represent in Aberdeen South. I'm very, very fortunate to have the opportunity to do that, and I would never seek to leave them without a voice in Westminster. Because if I wasn't here, if I wasn't sitting on those green benches, somebody would just move over and sit on them, and they wouldn't be speaking up for Aberdeen South. They wouldn't be speaking up for the northeast of Scotland. They wouldn't be speaking up for Scotland as a nation. So our power comes from our numbers in Westminster and our collective unity to drive forward the case of Scottish independence and to drive forward the issues that matter most to people back home. And whether it's the cost of living crisis and the fact that it's the SNP who's been on the forefront at the forefront of the arguments in relation to energy bill support and mortgage relief and the capping of staple food prices, akin to some of our European neighbours, whether it's in relation to foreign affairs, as you outlined earlier, with regards to Gaza and the SNP keeping it on the forefront of the agenda in Westminster, or whether it's a whole host of other issues. Remember, it was the SNP MP, Joanna Cherry, who stopped the prorogation of Parliament. It was Marion Fellows who's been at the forefront of the campaign in relation to the post office scandal. My colleagues have made a huge difference on behalf of the people they represent, on behalf of the people of Scotland. And, when we go into the general election, we'll continue to make that case that we're best placed to be Scotland's voice in Westminster.
Absolutely. And a general election is coming up soon, viewers. We don't know when, because they're holding the date quite close to their chest, and there's a lot of guesses and assumptions out there.
I don't think they know.
They're probably waiting for a time, but they'll lose anyway. We know that. So not being biased at all. So I was going to do a quick fire round of who said what between
go for it.
Keir Starmer. No, I decided not to. I decided not to because you really cannot tell the difference between Keir Starmer.
Okay.
Yeah, I was looking at, and they literally have the same policies. They've basically merged into one. So I think it was important to make that point to viewers that you really cannot tell them apart these days. So that would have been an interesting game, to be honest. I couldn't think of more, but we'll probably think of different ones in future, hopefully. And yeah, we've just got a minute left, Stephen. So is there anything else you want to just quickly say to see us off?
Yeah, so obviously the National have launched a fundraiser in recent days, and I was just speaking to Laura, the brilliant editor, just before I came on there, and she was telling me that it's now at £60,000, which is hugely impressive. It's testament to all the Nationals, the leadership. So I would just encourage folk, if they've got a spare quid or two, and I know it's very challenging times to consider donating to the appeal if they've not already done so, because it's incredibly worthwhile. And I think all of us stand on the right side of history in relation to this particular topic, and everyone's doing their bit, and this fundraiser is testament to that.
Absolutely, and it's a fundraiser that's supported by all of Scotland's political leaders, so it's actually unified all our leadership together. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much. That brings us exactly to 2 o'clock. Thank you so much for your time, Stephen. It was an absolute pleasure to speak to you, and I hope viewers have been able to get an understanding of the just transition of the budget as it pertains to the Northeast up here. So hopefully we'll see you next time for next month's episode. We'll give you a wee teaser a couple of weeks in advance about what this topic will be and who will be presenting. So thank you very much for viewing and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Stephen.